Before we start the show, I'd like to say thank you to Sydney Fish Market for supporting Talking Leadership. Sydney Fish Market is Australia's home of seafood. It is the Southern Hemisphere's largest fish market and Australia's premier destination for seafood. Sydney Fish Market supports industries with initiatives that inject value back into our fishing communities, which is a priority for the Sydney Fish Market, as well as ensuring a viable seafood industry for future generations. Sydney Fish Market is proud to recognise industry champions and support the development of our industry's future leaders. For more information about trading with Sydney Fish Market, please visit www.sydneyfishmarket.com.au or call them on 02 9004 1106. That number again, 02 9004 1106. And back to the show. Hello everyone and welcome to Talking Leadership with our next podcast, and it's a great pleasure to be joined today by Lowri Pryce from Oceanwatch Australia. Lowri is the CEO of the organisation. I'd just like to say g'day and thank you for joining us today, mate.
Thank you, Eric. It's good to be here.
Okay, so we're talking leadership. So in that vein, can I start off with what was your first leadership role?
I guess my first real leadership role was as a 21-year-old when I was at university and setting up a dance company in my final year of uni. So it was a bit of something that was somewhat thrust upon me, but I guess that would really be my first taste of having to lead a few people on an endeavour. Very exciting, but probably not best timed in your final year of uni.
Oh, okay. So can you elaborate a bit on why you took that role on?
Like I said, it was somewhat foisted upon me. It was really to pull together a group of a few people who were wanting to extend a specific type of dance into the future. So it was really about pulling people together and trying to find a way of funding the company, as well as pulling the right people together. But it was an endeavour that was worthwhile, but taught me a lot in terms of different personalities and how different people like to behave and sort of in terms of managing people.
Okay, that segues quite nicely to the next question. What, in your experience, Lowri, what's if any difference between leadership and management in your experience?
So I probably think of it in terms of management is around producing outputs. So it's sort of tangible things almost, management tends to do. Whereas leadership is really about inspiring, and it's almost, for me, it's almost outcome-based. So you're looking for that, strategically, what are you trying to achieve? So it's not just outputs, but outcomes. And obviously in the NRM world, we deal a lot with having to create things such as workshops or programs or training events. But in terms of changing behavior, we're trying to look at the outcome as well, which is maybe it's a better environmental performance or an awareness of certain topics, such as biosecurity, or could be lots of different things. But to me, that's where the difference lies. It's between that outcome-driven and the output-driven. So that's a technique. I guess that's quite technical. But also, once you start talking about values, that's when vision and mission starts coming in, and that's really more about a leadership role, I'd say.
Okay. And there's no right or wrong answers here. This is about your experiences in the leadership role. So here's one that I've had some interesting responses to. So in terms of the following statement, leaders make mistakes. How do you engage with an error or mistake that is attributed to your leadership?
I probably look at it quite organically in many ways, because coming as I do from, I don't come from a science background. It's more of a social science background. So in my mind, I'm expecting mistakes to occur because it's in the nature of the business. We're people, and people don't perform perfectly. So, and I'm certainly in that category of imperfect. So I expect it, and I think what we have to do is learn from it and be open to failing and understanding what went wrong. So when I look at my background, where performance arts is actually what we were doing, failure is an intrinsic part of the journey and the learning. So if you don't fail, you're actually not, in my mind, moving forward with integrity, and that's something that's really important. And I'm keen that in the NRM world, we learn to embrace failure as a part of understanding where we're going, and actually if you're going to fail quickly, as they say, but actually learn from it. Don't just let it fail and pretend it's never happened. It's about embracing it.
Sure. And for the benefit of the podcast listeners, NRM is the natural resource part of the world that Oceanwatch works in.
That's right. Yes.
No,
yes,
that's great. Right. So let me ask you this. What's the most difficult part of being a leader?
I'd say the most difficult part from my perspective is the fact that you're dealing with people. And of course, part of the role I see in terms of being a leader is that you need to embrace your people's goals and visions as well as the company. So they've got aspirations. And so balancing the aspirations of staff and the aspirations of a company, and of course they don't necessarily always align. So it's really about managing people. That's really the hardest part for me, because there are so many sensitivities in play. And I see my role as a CEO, it's really about encouraging and fostering the desires of the staff to work for Oceanwatch, in the sense that we're a charity, we're also a non-profit, and we work on the goodwill of our staff as well as our stakeholders. And if you're not encouraging your staff as a leader and taking them to the next level possible, then that's part of, I'm not doing my job well enough. So that's always the hardest part, is working with people. I could certainly say fundraising and finances is always difficult, especially for a not-for-profit. But I think the one that has most consequences for me is certainly staff, and the happiness and, the comfort level of staff to do their job really, really well, and me supporting them in that.
Sure. So how then in the roles that you've had in this role now in particular as CEO, how do you measure success?
Sometimes it's about whether or not I'm able to sleep at night.
Sure, okay.
That's part of it, though, is because you do have concerns and worries, and they may be financial, they may be human resources, they may be strategic, but it's really it's a mix of all of it. Are we hitting our targets? Are we producing the programs that we should be? Are we achieving the outcomes that we're looking for? Are we working with industry to our capacity? These are all markers for success, but Oceanwatch is in the business of working with people, and it's people who have influence on the environment. And so if the people are actively involved in what they're doing and are feeling that they're achieving, then that's the measure of success.
Great. Okay, so a couple of statements I want to put to you to see what you think. So the first one is on-the-job experience develops better leaders. What are your thoughts on that?
True, I'd say certainly without experience on the job. And well, it's not just experience on the job. It's the way in which you absorb the experiences. And you have to let the rawness touch you. you have to, from my point of view, I certainly feel that if you're not in it whole 100%, you're not experiencing it. So I think you have to let the impact of things that happen affect you. And that's that's a difficult one sometimes, because we work with an industry that often has a lot of angst and concerns and worries and management changes thrust upon them that can have a direct effect on everyone we're working with, and ourselves included. So that can be quite difficult to take, but I think part of the need is that you do allow these things to touch you and be affected by them, but still be able to rise to the challenge, the next challenge as it comes along. So yes, I probably think you do. Leadership is something that you experience, and I'm not sure if leaders are born, to be quite frank.
Oh, okay.
Certainly I didn't have that luxury.
Okay,
I wish.
You're preempting one of my next questions, but that's good. We'll come back to that one. Here's another statement. Formal education helps to develop better leaders.
Well, formal education depends on the type of education, I guess. I went, when I did my high school education, for me, was at a school that was very much keen to produce all-rounded individuals. So it was academic, but it was also art. It had a strong arts program, had a strong science program, had a strong languages program, but it was really about all-rounders. And I think that's part of the need, is to be well-rounded. I'm very lucky because I've lived and worked inside Australia in 3 different states, but also around the world as well. So it's sort of given me a bit of a broader perspective.
Okay, so getting back to that question you preempted around, so in your mind, are leaders born? So I'll take a step back. The statement here is leaders are born, not made. What's your view on that statement?
It's an interesting one when you're a female. Okay. Because we're still living in a world where most leaders are male and probably have a certain demographic. But my background is from Wales, and certainly from my family's perspective, the head of the household or head of the family was always the eldest female. And so my experience of leadership does really stem from family and the matriarch of the family. So when I was a little girl, the matriarch of my family was my great grandmother. And she certainly held the purse strings in the house, but also made all the major decisions, and maybe with some consensus with her husband and the rest of the family. But it's the matriarch that was very strong in my family. And so maybe leadership for me is slightly different. It's certainly a strong female presence in my life. So whether they're born, maybe the first female, I wasn't the first female in my family. So I think I'm a bit of a work in progress in that matter.
So it's thank you for sharing that, because this is one of the first interviews where someone's mentioned gender in terms of that particular question around leaders being born, not made. I subscribe to the fact that personally, this is personally my professional experience. There are probably in some industries which will remain nameless that getting to the top, if you're a female, there's potentially structural impediments to that. But that aside, and not that that's not insignificant, I think there are some industries where, irrespective of gender, you can flourish. So it might be around the type of industry that people choose to work in, but it's incredibly fraught with danger politically as well as philosophically around whether or not there are more advantages, more disincentives for women to be leaders than men, and I would be sort of wanting to ask the question: is that to what extent does culturally it impact it? And you've given a very insightful sort of overview from your family growing up. Mine was the opposite. Well, no, it wasn't the opposite. My mum and dad were both. They'd like to give the appearance of equal decision making, or if dad was left alone in a room, he would often say he's the one that makes the decisions. But when I heard mum speaking to him, I think it was more consensus based decision making than him being the primary breadwinner. And so, and my cultural background is South American, so it can differ. But no, thank you. And this is something again for, and I've said this in other podcasts. I'm a very early stage researcher in this area of leadership, and gender is something I think you can't avoid in this particular topic area. So can I?
Oh, for sure.
No, you go.
I think that's about expectations as well. I mean, I was fortunate to have the experience of growing up where, with a sister and a brother, we were raised as 3 children rather than a boy and 2 girls. We were raised to have the same expectations of life and the same opportunities of life. And I think that's something that you carry through with you. Certainly when I started working with the seafood industry, I was often the 1 or maybe 2 females in the room of big gatherings, but certainly that's not the case today. And that's something that's to be celebrated, quite frankly, because it means there's more of a balance in the room in terms of opinions and thoughts and experiences. And I think that's really strong and important to acknowledge. So, that's the great thing about programs where the encouragement of females to join in the conversation. I fully support them.
Which is fair enough in an industry that we're familiar with, being the seafood industry, that the women in industry, particularly in the small businesses that make up the bulk of our industry, are very much involved in the businesses that they jointly run with their partner. So having that equal say in a room is very important. So can I drag you to some of the research that I'm doing? And I've got a couple of things to put to you here to see what your thoughts are, again, based on your experience as a leader. In the literature that I'm looking at, it's pretty much pointing to quite strongly that strategic thinking and foresight are the most critical leader capabilities going forward, particularly from an agriculture perspective, but I guess beyond agriculture for leadership in general. What would be your view around those two as core leader capabilities, that being strategic thinking and foresight?
Look, both, absolutely, both are very important, and that would cut across a lot of different sectors. It's whether or not you develop those as you go along, or I don't think you necessarily can be taught that. I think it's partly understanding what they look like, and then understanding how that can be applied to whatever you're working in. So I think those they're good starting points, but you have to apply yourself and understand what foresight is for you and your company or your sector or your whatever you're working in. And equally, what does strategic thinking mean? And you've got to make your own interpretation of that, because it can mean very different things to different people. Just got to make sure that you and the board are on the same wavelength when it comes to strategic thinking. So understanding your role and responsibilities is just some starting points. Understanding your role and responsibilities in the context of the broader business environment is something very different. And that comes with time and exposure, and hopefully as you rise up through the ranks of a company, that you're getting to experience that before you're in the role of a CEO or whatever. And I think that's really important, though, providing exposure and the ability to understand. For us we're a small national charity, but we're a national charity. So making sure that everybody in the company has an ability to be exposed to national issues and national events. Seafood Directions is a great one, where, having an ability to understand what the latest innovations are within the industry and what people are doing, exposing everybody to that understanding is really vital. So you kind of learn strategic thinking somewhat on the job, but hopefully as you progress in your career, you'd be able to devour experiences that start building up your understanding.
And what would your view then be of foresight then? So from what I'm hearing you say, strategic thinking is about it's in the moment, and it has to reflect, if you're leading the organisation, has to be reflective of what your board is thinking around a particular issue or sets of issues. But can I take you to foresight then? Is that in that same category for you?
That's possibly a little bit more individualistic, because it's maybe foresight it's a little bit of being able to look into the future and do a bit of crystal ball gazing, and that's really maybe a bit more down to what your exposure is to industry and business, and being able to read what's happening. That's probably a bit more individualistic, and is more somewhat more of an innate sense of understanding the world around you.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Again, look, it's not, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's for everyone, particularly in your role, the degree to which you're applying your capabilities around strategic thinking and foresight will vary.
I'd probably go a bit further, because for us at Oceanwatch, being able to look into the future and see horizon scanning, essentially, what are the issues that are coming forward? It's really an important one. So it's being able to understand what's happening around us and how the environment is affecting business, and how business is affecting the environment is something really vital. So it's something that I personally do a great deal of trying to anticipate what's on the horizons, and so having that foresight about a lot of different issues and a lot of different capabilities and needs is really a vital piece of the puzzle.
Great. So, Lowri, this is the last question I've asked of everyone, so I'll ask you this one. What might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
I guess about being an effective leader, I guess I'll probably say, for a start, that my younger self would probably not have thought about being a leader.
Okay. Yep.
My younger self was far more concerned about the doing of the work, rather than reflecting on leadership roles. So I was far more interested in really getting the opportunity to do the work that I was really passionate about doing. And so for me, it was probably more about, hang in there, stay the course, learn as much as you can, experience as much as you can. I'm not a great one for personal roadmaps or planning a career. I've somewhat been a bit more organic, and head towards the things that I'm passionate about and really believe in. So I'd say those are the things I would say to young people anyway, myself included, if I could project backwards, is to find something that you're passionate about and stay the course, and make a difference. I think that's the other thing that mattered to me, is that it was about making a difference and being able to encourage others to make a difference as well. And it's not a surprise that I've ended up in the field that I'm in, and with the work that we do and the company I work for, I'm very passionate about. So yeah, stay the course, give 150%, surround yourself with people who are that passionate as well. That's the other thing I'm I'm really privileged to be with. And now, rather than looking at myself and what do I want to do, it's really about looking at them and what do they want to achieve and how can I empower them to do that.
Oh, wow. That's very astute observation. I'm always interested because with sort of casting your mind back to a younger version of yourself at whatever point in time you might be thinking. But you did say something that just piqued my interest there around leader capabilities. And did you use the word reflective? So do you believe that leaders are more reflective and introspective in that sense, or was that just particular to you? Because I'm genuinely curious because
yeah, that's a great question, actually, because I think the idea of a leader is it's somebody out front and sort of charging ahead and, signaling to whoever's the followers are that this is the way forward. But to me, I actually don't. I'm an introvert, so I'm one of the 40% who are not the extroverts out in front. And my leadership style is, it's a collegiate style. I work with experts, and I'm privileged to work with experts. So it is a fairly flat structure at Oceanwatch, and by design, because it is about solutions to difficult problems. So I'm here to enable those problems to be solved by our expert staff. So it really is an opportunity to kind of lead from the back in a sense, and not need to be out the front, raising the flag and pushing forward. And I think that's probably the style of it. Well, 40% of people are that type of person. So I think there's probably a lot of diversity in the type of leaderships we should be seeing and experiencing. It's a bit more quiet leadership than maybe expected.
Oh, there you go. That might be a new category of leader: the quiet, the quiet leader, the person that stays and sort of does that directing from the not from the front, but is there getting everyone
From the wing.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, that's a fantastic way to end the podcast. Look, Lowri, can I thank you for your time? These conversations are getting more and more interesting, and you've added to the collective thinking around leadership. And I thank you for your time. And just for everyone's reminder again, I've been chatting to Lowri Pryce, the CEO of Oceanwatch Australia. Thanks, Lowri.
Thanks, Eric. And just like to say thank you for doing this podcast. I think it's really an important one. So good on you and well done.
Thanks very much. And on that high note, I will say goodbye to everyone, and I'll see you on the next podcast.